Today, in 10 minutes or less, you're going to learn the French defense for the black pieces. A lot of people requested this after I made my video on the Caro-Kann. The French is very similar in the sense that after e4, you play e6, and you want to play the pawn to d5 on the second move. The French defense only works against the king's pawn. E6, d5 can be played against other setups, but when it's the French, it is this position. So the way we can think about the French is, first things first, the most common move you're going to get when you're playing the black side of this is this move in the center. Now, your opponents also can play other things, like, for example, the knight move, but then you're just going to go d5, and it's very difficult for white not to do something with this pawn right away. Oftentimes, the pawn structure is going to look the same, so let's start out with d4, d5 off the bat. Now, just like in the Caro-Kann, they can push, they can take, and they can defend the pawn or, just leave it. So let's start with the advanced variation. Once again, taking space. And when e5 happens, you need to lash out immediately in the center with c5. With the Caro-Kann, we put the bishop here, but it's blocked in. And this bishop is known as the French bishop. It kind of sits back. For now, it obviously doesn't have quite an active role, but against this central pawn push, the next move needs to be c5, and you're looking to undermine your opponent in the center. Most people here play c3, okay? They want to keep their center together. And black has a couple of different approaches in this position, but in general, the way that you should play this position is non-stop pressure on the center. So something like knight c6, a lot of people will play knight f3 in this position, and your next move can be queen b6. This is how I like to play this position, trying to maximize my pressure here. Obviously, if the capture ever happens, the bishop just recaptures on c5. Now, white, again, has a lot of different moves. So, for example, there's the very tricky bishop d3, which at first glance looks like it hangs this pawn, but it doesn't, due to this little trick. And bishop b5, which would be a check and win your queen. But in general, you just can't take that pawn right away. You need to finish your development usually. Like something like bishop d7 is even useful to prevent against that trick. But something like bishop e2 is also very solid. So the real question is, how does how does black play this position, right? Well, you do have to know a little bit of theory here. Just a little bit, because otherwise some of this stuff is going to look very strange to you. There is this idea in this position to play the knight to f5. You need to get this knight to that square, and you can do that through h6 or e7. And once that knight gets to f5, it's exerting very good pressure on the d4 pawn. So that might look something like, for example, knight h6 right now, and you might go, wait, Levy, why would I double my pawns? I know, that's why I said it. It will look a little bit strange if you don't know your stuff, but this actually is okay for black, because b2 is hanging now, and your opponent put all these pawns on the dark squares and then traded the dark squared bishop. So in many ways, they might be targets, not to mention the open g-file for the rook, and there is even one more very funny maneuver here, like this. And then you put pressure on this pawn anyway. So knight h6 is fine. And it might even happen that it does get captured, but I gotta get, this is the way you play this position. And then you try to get your knight to f5. So something like takes, knight f5, boom. Now you've got everybody fighting for this. So give this a shot, this little maneuver. The drawback of moving the knight through e7 is your opponent can actually just take. And we don't get to take with the bishop now. We have to actually take with the queen, but that's not even the right move because queen c7 here is a very tricky little move. Avoiding this pawn and going directly for the pawn in the center. But, again, you need to build your experience in this. I don't want you to memorize things so crazily, just trying to give you a bit of an introduction. This is how you would play the advanced French with the black side. Queen b6, try to rotate this knight to f5 and maybe bishop e7 and get castled. The bishops stay passive for now, but you are lacking space. So it is okay. Another slightly more risky way to play this position is the very early pawn break f6. But I don't really recommend this. It's okay theoretically. It's been played by a lot of grandmasters, but it can be difficult to manage such an open king for an amateur player. So just, again, you have this, but maybe you don't want to play it right away. The next thing we'll look at is just the very simple pawn takes, pawn takes. Now, just like in the Caro-Kann, here white can just develop or white can play c4. c4 is not a very scary move. You can just develop all your pieces naturally. One way I do like to play the exchange French for black is I like to castle queenside. And so what that looks like is something like knight f3, knight c6, bishop g4, bishop f5, queen d7, and long castles. And oftentimes what you'll do with these two pieces, if you're trying to castle queenside, is you'll play like this. You need to put your knight on e7 to shield, from this check, and then play something like bishop g4, queen d7, and start launching all these pawns at the enemy king. That's why you castle queenside, because you want to attack your opponent. But obviously you don't have to play like this. You can just play bishop d6 and, get like a totally symmetrical position. But this to me is boring, And in general, if you're going to play somebody who's trying to take the life out of the opening, they want the calm game, so you try to go after them. So in general, French exchange is not too scary, so you can play long castles or short castles. What really is a bit more challenging in the French defense is two of the more classical main lines. So this is knight c3. It's known as the classical. Knight f6 here is the main line, and then, there's a bunch of theory after here, white plays f4. This is called the Steinitz variation. I'm not going to go super crazy on the theory here, because, ultimately for that, you'll need a French repertoire tool. You go c5, knight c6, and bishop e7, and try to play from there. Expand on the queen side with a6, b5. Another thing that you can do is play the winnower, bishop b4 with the pin. But listen, some of these variations are pretty insane. So winnower defense variation, I should say. Go explore it. One thing to do to kind of, I should say, potentially cut back your need for study is against knight d2 or knight c3, just take the pawn. And then it'll become the same thing, because the knight has to take. And here there's two setups that you can employ. There's the Rubinstein French, which is when you want to play this move, but you play knight d7 first. And your setup here is a little passive, but pretty easy to play. Knight f6, b6, bishop b7, so your bishop is strong, and bishop e7 and castles. That's it. Very solid system. You can play it against both of them. It's a little bit more passive, but, well, that's chess. And another one is a funny one called the Fort Knox. The Fort Knox, you play bishop d7. Let's say they play knight f3. You play bishop c6, and you basically just trade this bishop. So you play like this, takes, which is like, what? That's crazy. And then c6. And you just develop the rest of your pieces. So knight f6, knight d7, and bishop d6. And you're saying that, okay, I traded off my poor bishop. Now I can set up a solid way. This might be too solid for you, but I wanted to give you a weapon. Fort Knox variation with the black pieces. This little bishop maneuver to take might confuse your opponents as well. Or the Rubinstein French with knight d7, knight f6, and then, just play a solid setup with bishop e7 and bishop b7. Of course, you don't need to go for this, but knight d2 Tarrasch French is, again, also very theoretical. So one way you can cut back your study is to take, and if not, then you need to explore these knight f6 positions or the main line here with c5, but I can't cover that in 10 minutes. What I like to play against knight d2 is this c5 move, but I've messed around with even h6 in this position, which just tries to play g5, g4 very early. So another main line here is bishop e7 with the same idea, g5, g4 to target this knight if it ever gets to f3. The way you learn these middle games is you go study the games of some of the best players. Nikita Vitugov is an exceptional French player, and other top grandmasters have played French defenses in the past. Go look at their games. And one last thing I will leave you with is basically the sidelines of the French. So something like the two knights, which actually I recommend in my course, as well as the b3 French. It's hard to give you a one-size-fits-all solution, but to those, be principled and play in the center. d5, knight f6, bishop e7, castles, c5, knight c6, and so on. There's also even ridiculous stuff like queen e2 out there, which makes you play this, and now you can't take back with the pawn. But against this, you can play c5, for example, knight c6, and just, if you follow basic opening principles, you should be absolutely okay, as long as you're not getting yourself into a mainline variation, and they play a sideline. Just follow your gut, and you should be absolutely all right. Hopefully you enjoyed in this video. Hop into the comments. Obviously, once again, let me know your thoughts, how you're liking the 10-minute videos on these openings. And for today, what's your favorite genre of music? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video if you haven't already, and I will catch you in some of the other ones.